Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into something a lot of us feel but struggle to explain, the internal mechanics of sensory overload, social exhaustion, and anxiety. And we're getting these insights straight from an incredibly candid source, someone who actually spent 9 years living as a Hikikomori. That's a term used for severe social withdrawal. We're going to break down their deep self-reflections to understand exactly what is happening when your mind just shuts down. So let's jump right into a super relatable scenario. Have you ever felt totally fine about taking a train somewhere, but the second you realize you also have to catch a bus afterward, it's like your legs are literally glued to the floor? Why does adding one simple bus ride or, trying to pack an overnight bag instead of just going for the day cause this complete, utter mental paralysis?
Which brings us to Section 1, the overflowing glass. Let's take a look at processing variables and how our brains actually handle compounding stimuli.
The author uses this brilliant metaphor to explain our mental capacity. Picture pouring water into a glass, just drop by drop. For a long time, everything's totally fine, right? Nothing happens. But right as the water hits the brim, that very last tiny drop causes a sudden, messy overflow. Well, your mind works exactly the same way. Taking a train is just one drop. You can absolutely handle that.
A simple day trip on a train is a single, totally manageable variable. But man, the moment you add a bus transfer and then an overnight bag, you aren't just adding a bit more time to your trip. You're suddenly piling on a cascade of unpredictable variables. Think about it. How many clothes do I need? What if I run out? Wait, where exactly do I transfer? Suddenly, the sheer volume of information and all those on-the-fly decisions just skyrocket, completely flooding your mental bandwidth.
So here is the absolutely crucial point. When your mind goes blank in these situations, it is not a sign of weakness. Seriously, it's not a lack of willpower, it is simply a mechanical consequence of your brain trying to process a massive volume of unknowns all at the exact same time. The author points out that recognizing this as a capacity issue rather than some kind of personal failure is the very first step to breaking that toxic cycle of self-blame.
Moving into Section 2, the second meeting trap. We're going to explore the mask of consistency and see how this exact same concept of variable overload applies to our social lives.
Have you ever noticed how it's sometimes surprisingly easy to just chat up a total stranger? According to our source, this happens because a first meeting is a completely blank slate. You've got no history together, zero expectations. Even if the conversation gets a little awkward, it honestly doesn't matter because there's no previous version of yourself that you're expected to live up to.
But the second you agree to a follow-up meeting, the whole game changes. You get hit with what the author calls invisible pressure. Suddenly, your brain is forced into overdrive, trying to remember exactly how you acted, how you spoke, the exact vibe you gave off that first time. And why? Because we feel this intense, honestly exhausting need to perfectly replicate that persona so we don't seem inconsistent or weird.
The real terror of that second meeting comes down to this quote: "Once there is a continuation, you have to continue improvising without a script. You become terrified of dropping the mask." The source explains that, sure, you might be able to act out a role for one brief random encounter, but a continuing relationship? That means you have to keep improvising that exact same character, completely unscripted, and keeping that up requires constant, incredibly draining mental energy.
Okay, on to Section 3, jealousy and stagnation. What happens when others move on? This constant mental exhaustion from managing variables and social masks often leads directly to isolation, which brings us to a really tough topic: the pain of watching everybody else move forward while you feel totally stuck.
Here's the thing, when you're isolated and just trying to protect your mental capacity, the outside world doesn't hit pause. Hearing about friends hitting major life milestones, getting married, moving abroad, landing big new jobs, it can trigger an overwhelming sense of panic. And the source makes a great point here. This doesn't mean you're a cold or bitter person. It happens because these announcements force you to confront your own stagnation. It makes you feel desperately left behind on your own timeline.
I love how the author beautifully deconstructs this painful feeling of jealousy. It isn't just pure, toxic envy. It's actually this complex mix of totally natural emotions. Think of it like this. About 40% is genuine admiration, because you honestly wish for those things too. Another 40% is this deep impatience with yourself for not having achieved them yet. And the last 20%, that's actual respect and acknowledgement of your friend's ability to take action. The author argues that if we just broadly label this whole complex mix as jealousy and hate ourselves for it, the emotion has nowhere to go but inward, and that just causes way more pain.
Section 4, 9 years of solitude.
Let's talk about reframing lost time, because understanding all these intense internal hurdles brings us to the really heavy reality of long-term isolation.
9 years. Just let the sheer weight of that number sink in for a second. The author spent 9 whole years living as a Hikikomori. They write that when you suddenly realize nearly a decade of your youth has just slipped away, time you could have spent traveling or dating or building a career, the grief is so immense that tears literally blind you. You just can't brush off the heavy weight of that lost time. But here is where the source challenges us to profoundly reframe this timeline. Wishing those 9 years had meaning isn't just some coping mechanism or escape from reality. It actually requires recognizing that time as a necessary quiet period. It was during this exact isolation that the author was able to seriously observe their own complex traits, like finally realizing how stimuli compound and why they get so exhausted playing a character. Ultimately, those 9 years were a vital period of psychological survival. It was about protecting a highly sensitive mind from completely breaking down.
And that leads us to our final section. Section 5, pacing your next steps. Having validated the past, how do you actually re-enter the world without instantly triggering that overflowing glass we talked about earlier? The absolute most vital takeaway from the author's experience is this: you cannot force your way through sensory overload using sheer willpower. It is just not going to work. Instead, you have to systematically reduce the daily variables in your environment. You have to actively, intentionally manage your capacity. So let's turn this into some real, actionable advice. If you're heading out, pre-plan the route with the fewest transfers possible. If you're staying overnight somewhere, decide your exact clothing combinations well in advance so you aren't agonizing over choices on the spot. And perhaps most importantly, cut out any spontaneous side quests or detours. Stick to the mission. By following these highly specific steps, you completely remove the heavy burden of making on-the-spot decisions. You're effectively keeping your mental glass half empty and, more importantly, entirely manageable. And as you start taking these small steps, like, say, successfully going out just by reducing your variables, you have to remember to change your measuring stick. If you keep comparing your timeline to a friend who just got married or moved abroad, it is only going to restart your cycle of anxiety and paralysis. Everyone has their own timing, right? From now on, your only metric for success should be comparing yourself to where you were yesterday. We're going to leave you with this final, incredibly powerful thought from the author to reflect on. Your mind going blank, your fear of second meetings, your complex feelings of jealousy, none of these are signs of weakness. They are proof that you've faced your life seriously and perhaps far more sensitively than most people do. So, what if things shifted today? How might your life change if you stopped treating your sensitivity as a flaw to be fixed and actually started treating it as proof of your deep, authentic engagement with the world? Thank you so much for exploring this explainer with me today.